On October 21st, IBJ unveils the 2025 Women of Influence. Join us to celebrate Indy's most inspiring leaders and hear the powerful stories behind their success. Don't miss this moment. Register now at ibj.com/influence2025.
This is the IBJ podcast for the week of October 6th, 2025. I'm Lesley Weidenbener, editor of IBJ, in this week for Mason King. Governor Mike Braun's administration last week released an audit that the governor ordered last spring of the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, which is the state's job creation agency, as well as related organizations, including the IEDC's own foundation, as well as Elevate Ventures, the Applied Research Institute, and other groups. From the beginning, the governor and Commerce Secretary David Adams referred to the review as a forensic audit, a term generally used when fraud or legal irregularities are expected. But the governor's office said the review uncovered nothing criminal. But the auditors did include dozens of findings in their report, including situations involving conflicts of interest, poor documentation, and a lack of transparency. I talked with IBJ reporter Susan Orr, who has been following the issue for months about what the audit found and what the results mean for several organizations. Here is our conversation. Okay, Susan, thanks so much for joining the IBJ podcast this week.
Good to be here.
I know that you had a really busy week. We've been anticipating this audit, and it finally came down on Thursday, and you wrote stories Thursday and Friday. So we appreciate that you're taking some time here at the end of the week to talk about it.
Oh, sure.
So before we get into the details, can you tell us who did this audit on behalf of the governor's office, and what were the instructions that the governor's office gave the auditors?
The audit was done by a Washington, D.C. based company. They've actually got offices in many different places, but they're based in Washington. Their name is FTI Consulting. They were tasked with looking at the IEDC and then several of its related entities, which would include Elevate Ventures, the Applied Research Institute, the IEDF, which is a foundation related to the IEDC, looking at things like potential conflicts of interest, financial oversight, use of state funds, things that I guess if you generally just had to say transparency type issues and conflict of interest issues.
So I think it's worth noting the governor decided to do this in March or April. Is that right? In the spring?
April they announced. Yeah,
Okay.
and I mean, I'm sure that he, didn't just decide one day to do it, but yeah, they announced in late April that they were going to be hiring a firm for this audit.
And that was a few months after he took office, after 8 years of Governor Eric Holcomb's administration. And we know from, I think, previous conversations here on the podcast that Governor Braun has a different approach to economic development. One of the things he really focused on in the campaign, Governor Braun, was talking about the IEDC transparency. And so I think this audit sort of plays into that. Do you know how much the state authorized to pay, the governor's office authorized to pay for this audit?
They were authorized to pay up to $800,000. I will say that originally FTI had said that their estimate was that it might take them between 6 and 12 months to finish the audit. They actually wrapped up a little sooner, 5 months. So I don't know whether that means maybe they didn't spend all that money.
Yeah, we'll probably find out in the
but it is. I mean, I do think that it's a little bit noteworthy because often when you hear an estimate, if anything, it takes longer, and in this case, it was shorter than they thought.
How long was the report that they produced?
127 pages.
And so can you give us, before we delve into the details, can you give us kind of the top line results? What was the overall takeaway?
The overall takeaway was, number one, there wasn't anything criminal found. I think a lot of people were wondering about that because the governor, when he announced the audit, he described it as a forensic audit. And of course, when you hear forensic, that's what you think is somebody did something wrong. There were no findings like that, but FTI's report said that they identified 45 findings and observations that were generally related to the things that we've talked about: conflict of interests, potential compliance issue, financial oversight. There were some particular details in there, but that's the gist of it.
So let's talk first about the Indiana Economic Development Foundation. I was a State House reporter when this organization came about. It was formed at about the same time that the IEDC, the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, was founded. And frankly, it was supposed to be a way that the IEDC could raise money privately and spend it on things that the state might not want to spend money on. So we used to talk about the IEDC as a quasi-public or private-public organization. That was one of the reasons why. But so what did the report say about the foundation?
And I will say that when I think of the foundation, the main way that I think of it, just sort of as an observer, is like every time the governor or some state official would take like an economic development trip overseas, that it's not cheap to take a bunch of people over to Japan or wherever. And so they would always make the point that, well, the foundation paid for this. So with that said, the things that caught my eye, I guess, were related to that overseas travel. They said, there was excessive spending, that some of those trips involved like chartered aircraft, first class airfare. I think there was a mention of like thousands of dollars spent on tickets to a race, things like that. There was also another thing that jumped out was that audit report said that there just wasn't enough oversight. The foundation and the IEDC itself share the same staff and the same board members. So you could say they're separate, but you could also say they're kind of the same. One of the things the auditor said that they found frequent cases in which a donor to the foundation, which could be a company, a lot of the utility companies were donors, the same donors receive significant grants and tax credits from the IEDC. And of course, that's a key thing that the IEDC does, is that they offer incentives to companies that are either coming to the state or expanding in the state.
Even before the audit came out, the governor's office had taken some action related to the foundation. It had said that the foundation had not for years, and we knew this as reporters because we had continually asked for more disclosure of who was giving to the foundation. And actually, the foundation had stopped providing that information, and in addition, had stopped filing the tax forms that would provide some information. And I remember at the beginning of all of this, Governor Braun ordered the IEDC to basically file forms for all of those years. And so now that the audit is out, what kind of action what's happening with the foundation?
It's hard sort of not to talk about the foundation in the past tense for those that follow this, because at the IEDC's quarterly board meeting, which was in late September, I think the 24th, the board voted to wind down the foundation. And there were not a lot of details about like the timing or exactly how that was going to look. But the governor himself, he mentioned it in passing, but that is what the case is. This vote came at the same meeting where the board voted to release the audit, although it took another week before the audit actually came out because they had to do, last-minute legal review and potential redactions.
Let's take a break to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
Welcome back to the IBJ podcast. I'm Lesley Weidenbener, in this week for Mason King. I'm talking with reporter Susan Orr about a state audit that includes recommendations for the Indiana Economic Development Corporation and its affiliated organizations. So let's talk a little bit about Elevate Ventures. That was probably, at least, from my perspective, from the perspective of what we were reporting about at IBJ, it really felt like that was one of the biggest issues going into the audit was, had Elevate Ventures been doing something it wasn't supposed to do? And what was the nature of the relationship between the IEDC and Elevate? Even before the audit findings came out, the state froze funding to Elevate. Can you describe a little bit about what it is that Elevate does and how it uses money that the state approves?
Right. So Elevate Ventures, in essence, they're a nonprofit and they are a venture investment firm, but they're investing public money on behalf of the state. And I think part of that is part of why Elevate Ventures situation maybe was elevated among some above some of these others, because a lot of the companies that they fund are sort of young, buzzy tech startups, including some startups that have gone on to be quite successful and maybe sold for a good chunk of money, and startups all over the state. So a lot of people, especially if you follow tech or startup, are interested in that. So their main purpose is to invest in these startups or young companies. They also do programming, and once they invest in a company, they take on kind of an advisory role. So if that company's leadership needed some guidance about fundraising or doing some other things, Elevate sort of supporting them in that way.
As I recall, Elevate was getting money from the state in sort of two ways. Some money to invest, and then some money to help it run its programs. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's right. They were under a professional services agreement, just like any other vendor would be if they were doing business with the state. And the state, the IEDC agreed to pay Elevate. I do not remember the exact amount, but several $100,000 a month. And that was really just operating expenses. So like to cover their staff salaries, rent, programming costs, if they were traveling around the state and doing workshops and that sort of thing. I guess there were two sides to the freeze. The Elevate was not able to invest in any startups for a period of time, which you can imagine how disruptive that would be if that's the core thing that you're supposed to do and now you can't do it. And then for a time, they were not getting those monthly allotments. So that would be basically like, okay, you're still working, but we're not going to give you a paycheck. So that was kind of rough. They have gotten caught up on those payments, and I think starting this month they'll be getting those again on their regular monthly schedule. But for a while there, I mean, it was pretty tense for them.
You talked to several people in the startup world about what it meant to them to have this period where it wasn't clear whether the state was going to continue working with Elevate. It wasn't clear whether Elevate had done something wrong. What was it like for the startup community, this waiting period over several months?
We had a story on that about a month ago, and the message I got from the people I talked to was they were generally in support of Elevate. They felt like that organization had done good work or has done good work, and especially supporting companies that might be considered like too risky, too young, too small for really anybody else to feel like they wanted to support them. So the sort of leaders in that community said, "Well, we like what Elevate has done. We know the people there. We think they're good people. We don't think there's anything wrong, but if there is, let's know what it is." And I think they were frustrated by, at that point, it had been several months that they'd had these pretty public amorphous,
Kind of opaque. Yeah, amorphous is a great word.
These accusations, and nobody on the outside, to some degree, including us, because nobody was really wanting to talk to us. there's just this cloud of what's going on. Did they do something wrong? But nobody really knew for sure. I mean, I guess we got signs last week when the IEDC voted that Elevate could resume its investing activity. And then coincidentally, Elevate had its big annual rally conference last week. And I guess the governor popped in, unscheduled pop in to give a shout out to Elevate. And so when I was at rally last week after that, people at Elevate were they seemed pretty jubilant. And like,
it felt like an about face. I mean, the governor's office, I remember the press conference where they first announced the audit and the freeze, they sounded pretty negative about Elevate. And so all of a sudden last week, it felt like a big change. So what did the audit actually say about IEDC's relationship with Elevate?
The main takeaway that I got was, a couple of things. They painted a picture of like that there just was not enough communication between the Elevate and the IEDC. Not necessarily that there was anything wrong, but that the Elevate just wasn't telling IEDC everything maybe that it should have been doing. There was also several things around, if you want to put it in the category of like record keeping or documentation or policies and procedures that just weren't as diligent as they should be. I know one thing that's come out of the audit that the audit mentioned was that Elevate had not really been diligent about tracking all these investments. Like, what fund is investment X coming out of? What about the returns? And like really having that good detailed bookkeeping. And so that was one thing that's come out of it is the audit report said, well, Elevate has gone back to do this all the way back since its founding in 2011.
Yeah, my impression from reading the audit report was that a lot of that record keeping problem must have been pretty early because I think it specifically named its first fund, which would have been several years ago, that they hadn't necessarily tracked as well some of its earliest investments.
Yes, I don't remember the details on that, but I mean, they did make a point to say that this project where Elevate is retroactively going back, that it was going back to its very earliest investments. So that would sort of support what you're saying. Like, they wouldn't have to go back and do that if they had done it all along. So
yeah. And so what did, the Elevate put out a statement, their statement that they put out, that organization put out, actually included a statement from the governor, a quote from the governor, which again felt like a huge turnaround from a few months ago.
right.
What was it that Elevate said about the results of this audit? What did they want to emphasize?
I mean, I think the headline was pretty telling. And of course, this is their headline that they put on their press release, but it said independent audit clears Elevate Ventures. And right up front, they said no, there was no evidence of illegal activity found. And I think that Elevate, rightly so, had, if you were living under a cloud for several months, and you were the subject of a forensic audit, if you didn't do anything, that would be a very uncomfortable place to be. So that was a big message.
Yeah, and it feels like Elevate has had some impacts. I mean, like you said, they were trying really hard. They did stage their annual rally event,
They did.
and it felt as if that was a tough go, right? To try to raise money, sell tickets, get sponsors while it wasn't clear whether the governor's office thought you were doing the right thing or whether the governor's office was going to continue to work with you.
Yes, and sort of on a related point, for the first 2 years of the rally event, the IEDC supported it financially. This year they did not, and I think that was always the play that the IEDC would support the first year, and then it would kind of ramp down its support. I'm not sure if Elevate expected that it was going to get zero in year 3, as opposed to I think $1 million last year and 1.75 the first year. But yeah, I mean, it was a tough go. And I know I don't know, within the last month or so, Rally sent out they would send out these periodic email blasts. And the headline of one of them said something like, "Yes, rally is still happening," which, tells you.
Says a lot about the atmosphere.
Yes, for sure. So,
Yeah. So Elevate is obviously touting nothing criminal. They've said they were cleared. There were some things, though, that they pointed out, that the auditors pointed out. What are a couple of changes that are taking place? I guess you mentioned one. Elevate is going back and cleaning up some record keeping, going back. And then there's a board change. Is that correct?
So the governor's office will now have a seat on the board. I know that previously the IEDC, I think, was invited to the meetings, and then I think that language got a little bit stronger more recently and said that they needed to be at the meetings, and now the governor has a board seat. And as we've mentioned, since the governor chairs the IEDC board, potentially there's not really much separation between what the governor wants and what the IEDC wants.
I wanted to spend some time on Elevate because it's certainly something we've been writing and talking about a lot. I know people in the startup community have been talking about it, but were there other things in the audit you think are worth noting?
Yes, there was a part in the audit that sort of broke down, okay, this is how much money the IEDC distributed over the 2-year period that we examined, which was 2022 through 2024. The thing that jumped out at me is that spending on the LEAP district, which IBJ readers will probably know, is the that big innovation district that is
Boone County.
Yeah, it was sort of conceived under the Holcomb administration, and it's the IEDC spent many millions on land acquisition, and I think the idea was to just sort of create, maybe not shovel ready, but a innovation park. And Eli Lilly has they've already started building some
pretty
things.
Big campus, a big
Yeah,
campus
for their part of it.
Yeah.
So during those 3 years, just over a third of everything that the IEDC paid out was related to the LEAP district. That includes land purchases, but it would also include other things, attorney's fees, or just other
brokerage fees.
Yes,
those kinds of things.
Yeah. So
it was notable how big, an amount that the state had spent on it. I also thought it was interesting that the audit mentioned that originally the state said it planned to buy as many as 9,000 acres of land. It actually, as of August, had only bought a little over 6,000 acres. I just thought that was an interesting point that I don't think we've reported. So,
yeah, I think there's probably a lot for us still yet to discover in that audit report, since we're not even 24 hours since its release. But that's one thing I'm interested in days and weeks to come, is going back through that with a little bit more of a fine-tooth comb, because I do think there's probably a lot of details. I mean, not necessarily any zingers or smoking guns, but just little things that we didn't know that maybe we can develop going forward.
So there was definitely some things related to conflict of interest, issues related to ARI, Applied Research Institute. I don't think we have time to get into that. I think we'll do some additional reporting on that. We might come back to talk about that a little bit in the future. But anyway, thanks, Susan. Thanks so much for coming on and giving us a rundown of what happened. I know this is, as you said, we're going to keep looking at it, and it's going to be in the news for a little while, but we appreciate this update.
No problem. Anytime.
Thanks again to Susan Orr for joining us this week. You can read more coverage about the audit, including stories from Susan and reporter Marek Mazurek, at IBJ.com. You can also read stories at IBJ.com about the World Aquatics Swimming World Cup, which will bring 450 swimmers this weekend to the Carmel High School Natatorium, and about a new system that aspiring barbers and stylists can use to complete their cosmetology training. Also, reporter Dave Lindquist has a story about a new documentary, Sweet Lorraine in Auschwitz, which will debut during this month's Heartland International Film Festival. It tells the story of Frank Grunwald, who survived imprisonment in a series of harrowing concentration camps and now lives in Indianapolis. You can find these and other stories at IBJ.com. Come back next week for another edition of the IBJ podcast. Mason King will be back then.
You know, the economy and the market are in a hairy place these days. It's up a lot, it's down a lot, it's sideways, and it seems on the hour there's breaking news coming out of all areas of the country. How do you get your head around that? How do you not go crazy in the process? I'm Peter Dunn. You may know me as Pete the Planner, IBJ columnist, and my job for years has been to help you understand your financial life better in context with everything else going on. So, what am I encouraging you to do? Well, listen to the Pete the Planner Show. Yeah, it's a podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts, or simply listen at ibjpodcasts.com.
The IBJ Media Podcast Network is the soundtrack of a growing state. Indiana is on the move, and you can hear it happening on the IBJ Media Podcast Network. We bring you the voices at the center of our economy, our courts, our companies, and our communities. Subscribe now and be part of the conversation that's building Indiana's future. Find all of our shows by searching IBJ Media in your podcast app or visit ibjpodcasts.com.